Once upon a time in a game world far beyond my wildest dreams, I see a beautiful girl with colorful hair that will soon fall in love with me. Sometimes it's cold outside and just wanna get under the sheets. Then I see your empty bed and just wanna go to sleep. One day you gave me your number with 7 kisses and no hugs. But it turns out that were kisses. There were 7 deadly exes, and I have to save my life from getting beat up.
Man, that was amazing. That's quality stuff.
Thank you.
That's the first. So, ladies and gentlemen out there, this. Oh, hey, Flying Saucer! I've not seen you around in forever. Good to have you here. This is the final episode of our Scott pilgrimage, and Cartoonicus there put together a just remarkable little animated montage featuring stills from the colored version of Scott Pilgrim and music written by the Metals friend. Who has a name that I don't recall because
he goes by Jin Michaels online.
There you go, Jin Michaels. So today, we are checking out Volume 6, Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour, which wraps up the whole thing. And I'll tell you what, man, I really like this. I read it again over the weekend, of course, getting ready for the show. I appreciate. I enjoyed it. So we don't want to spend forever going over every detail, but as we remember from the last volume, Scott has defeated the twins and saved. Oh my goodness sakes! My brain just cut out on me.
Kim,
thank you. Saved Kim, and Ramona disappears for parts unknown, and then Scott is called up by Gideon saying, "When would be a good time for you to die?" And that's where it leaves off. Which is, I don't know. I think that's an amazing cliffhanger.
Oh, it's a perfectly smug line.
So we start off this issue with. Dude, I had never noticed this. Check this out here. This 2-page spread has a title and Scott Pilgrim's in his finest hour, and he's laying there on a couch under a blanket.
I thought that was clever. You notice he's dreaming or sleeping the logo.
I had never noticed that before for some reason.
Though this was the first one in a while that I did not notice any particular pop culture reference associated with it. You see something?
Oh, with the title card?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. So Scott is, of course, living in an apartment that his folks are paying for. He may or may not he's not working at the beginning, but he is playing a lot of video games. And the first part of the book is his friends are all trying to convince him to move on with life, because just because Ramona's gone doesn't mean that life doesn't need to happen, and people have things. So you have Wallace tries to convince him that he needs to get out there and date people, and Stephen Stills tries to tell him he needs to, maybe he ought to think about the new band or visiting his new band because Stephen Stills, their band broke up when Kim moved away, and the Sex Bomb broke up when Kim moved away, and so everybody is trying to convince Scott to do something with his life, and Scott's just kind of in a funk, which I think is pretty appropriate. But how do you guys think that relates to Scott's overall journey?
Well, I mean, clearly this is what we call in film the belly of the whale, where things were starting to get better, and then just before the final act, you need that tragedy to bring the hero to his lowest point before he can finally override that so that he can climb the mountain, as it were.
Yeah, it's definitely a developmental regress. You see this a lot with like addicts or anybody who's having a problem where they were progressing because they had a motivation, right? And he was getting a lot better. Scott was even starting to do some mature adult things. But then when the motivation is taken out, he kind of like regresses into either the state they were before, or sometimes they spiral down even worse than that.
Indeed. And so one of the things that people keep mentioning to Scott is that he still has to fight Gideon. And nobody, and Scott's like, why would I even bother? Because I'm clearly not going. I mean, like, Ramona's out of the picture, so why would I fight Gideon altogether? Meanwhile, things are going on around him. This is where we have the definitive statement where Stephen has mentioned that he'd come out as gay to everybody except Scott in Volume 5, and Scott was just too busy to notice. So,
Is that what happened? Because that means I didn't notice either.
Yeah, it's really...
Well, there were some hints there, but it's at the end of this book. And Stephen's like,
obvious.
I didn't tell you because you were kind of busy and I didn't want to distract you or anything.
That almost sounds like it's a breaking the fourth wall and he's saying that to the audience.
I think the part of it is to reinforce that, like, we're seeing Scott's story and everybody else is just a supporting character to Scott's story. But the other part of it is
because Neil does mention it. He calls him a homo.
Calls him Captain Homo.
Yeah.
And part of Neil's story in 5 is that he's mad because Stephen's not hanging out with him anymore, and he feels rejected and he feels alone, and then he calls him Captain Homo, and Scott's reply is, "Oh, that's nice." So it's just some sort of insult. So Scott was even obliquely told in Volume 5, but doesn't notice for his own Scott reasons. So Scott, one of the great things in the story is that, or as far as looking at Scott's journey overall, is that we're reintroduced to Knives, who is now 18, and Scott's whole position as looking at Knives is Knives states that she still like cares for Scott as a person, but has no interest in dating, and because that's not what she's about. She wants to go and experience her own life, whatever they think that means. Which I thought was good because I feel like it was good to see Knives have that kind of agency, and willingness to say hard things to Scott, because there haven't been very many people. Well, many people in the story say hard things to Scott, but not many of them does Scott actually understand what is being told. So I thought that was a fun way to play with that dynamic.
It was a departure from the movie, because in the movie it seemed like everything came down to him having to fess up to what he had done to her. Mm-hmm. And here she ends up actually gaining her own character development completely individual or separately from him.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Well, you have a lot more room to breathe in this format, and I would say everyone except for, I mean, technically Stephen did have development. It was just sidelined and really poorly done
Yeah.
to the point that it just you don't care about it. Like it feels cheap what happens to him. But aside from that, like all the main characters do go through some type of progression
Right.
in this story.
And even the situation with Steven, I mean, it's really interesting or funny because Steven seems to be like other people would see in their circle would see Steven as being, you know, maybe one of the more together characters. But
Yeah, like he's the group dad or something.
yeah. But the funny thing is, when you actually look at all of Steven's story altogether, he's
He's
not
the
only an
least.
emotional wreck, he's also an absolute jerk to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and treats everyone instrumentally. And
He's
and
actually
so,
perfect for the music business.
yeah, well, fair.
Oh
I'm
no,
gonna
he's been
push
going to
back.
sell gold records.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the character arc aspects, specifically for Scott, because it's one of the things that I struggled with. I didn't really care for with Scott Pilgrim overall. And I'm trying to phrase this really specifically because I think there's a nuance to it. But I was not satisfied with his character arc because it felt to me that Scott had more of us being told that he had a character arc than demonstrating evidence for it by the end of it. And for me, where that, because when we think about character arcs, to me, it's more about choice and less
Okay.
about someone saying that they've had a character arc. So for one of the best examples for this would be Ebenezer Scrooge, right, from Christmas Carol, because he goes through the journey. He's shown that he's wrong, but the big difference is the chapter, which is the concluding, or was it second to last chapter or so, where Scrooge basically makes a bunch of different choices as a result of his character change. So it's like, I used to be greedy and I used to treat people like, things. And as opposed to that, I'm going to spend more money than a normal person would. So you get to see evidence of the change, and then the epilogue shows how much further he went. And I feel like, and maybe this is something that modern storytelling does, and I think there's something to be said about how modern storytelling approaches this, but I don't get the impression that Scott is that much of a different person from the beginning to the end of the story based on the choices he makes.
Well, I think what we get is
Because let me finish, because he's a jobless loser at the beginning who kind of apologizes for things. And at the end of the story, he has more of a realization that he's a jobless loser who should apologize for more things. But I don't see him making different decisions. And I feel like what happens instead is that we get a character arc where he is put at the beginning of a character arc and then the story ends. Whereas in previous years, what we used to do in storytelling is we would show characters changing and then making very conscious different decisions, and even seeing the results of those over time. And that's often what epilogues would get tacked on the end of stories, so you could really see that.
So when you say, let's say you're watching a Disney movie, right, or any kind of love story, right?
I hate Disney movies.
And
yeah, go ahead.
You have all this romance going on, right? In a romance stories are basically origin stories, because everything comes down to getting those two characters to say 3 words, right?
Sure.
Realize, oh, this is how I feel about the person, and then you end, with the kiss, or at the very least, at the very most, at the wedding, and they lived happily ever after. And you're never going to see the progression that it takes after that. What you're talking about here is what some stories do, where they're going to get their characters over the biggest hurdles to themselves and then say, and he then went on from there.
See, that's my problem, is that I feel like we're put so early at the beginning that personally, and like I said, I think some of this is your mileage will vary, but I feel like for me personally, I feel like he's so at the beginning. I feel like he's actually a step behind where he was 2 installments ago. Because was it Scott Pilgrim gets it together, right?
Mm-hmm.
that's where I saw him make different decisions. And I was like, all right, this is real progression.
Well, yeah, no, and I think we saw that in volume 5 too, where he's serious about the ongoing nature of. I mean, he for him, it's him and Ramona forever. Period. I'm going to take care of these guys, and that'll be it. And Ramona's having all these other issues that are in play at that point. And I definitely think that where we begin, we see a regression about this until Scott is sent to northern Ottawa, right? Where he goes and visits Kim and Kim's fam up in the great white north, and that is a separate. I think that whole situation rounds us out to one of the other themes in the story, which is the nature of perception, because
Sure.
Scott has not perceived things accurately throughout the course of the story, and we don't necessarily understand how much of that isn't there.
So my issue there is that the way I see it, perceiving things is not character progression, and merely coming to the realization that, oh wow, Scott Pilgrim, you suck, is actually something that it's just happened like every book. Every book since volume 1 has been, Scott, you suck, and then he kind of goes, I suck. Oh, I guess I should apologize. And so in this one, he just realizes that I should apologize harder because I suck even worse than I thought. To me, the real crux of character development from a structural point of view is where you make a different decision that you would not have made before you had the realization. And I feel like we're getting shorthand for that. We get like, he has the power of understanding. And I'm like, what choice
first of all, you're jumping way ahead about what we've talked about.
I know. Sorry. I'm just saying, like,
yeah. So
he pulls a sword or whatever at his heart, whatever it is he does in video game terms. But what I'm saying is that where is he
at that point you're already far into stuff, like, because when
I was using an example, I can derail from that. What I'm saying is that I do not see at the end of the story him making different decisions. I just see him making the same decisions with my eyes are more open, and I'm like, to me that is not satisfying character development. And I feel like that's not necessarily that what's interesting to me is that I think that also is a commentary on storytelling and in this period. So I'm not even, I'm not entirely sure where we end up there. And I'm not saying it's not a product of its environment and time, zeitgeist, but I don't know. Like I said, I feel the need to push back a little bit regarding Scott's character arc, because I think sometimes people go, "Wow, what a character arc," and I'm like, I'm not entirely convinced. I'm not convinced.
I think the problem is we're not going to be able to talk about it until we can see the other stuff that happens.
That's fair. Go ahead. I'm just telling you, since it got brought up, I wanted to say.
Well, we were talking about Stephen Stills, not about Scott. So
I heard the words character arc and development. So that was my cue.
Instantly, you're like, I hate Scott Pilgrim so much.
No, we will get to this. I do think there is a character arc and development here. It just may not be the one that you want.
Fair point.
That could be it. Well, and so anyway, so as we alluded, Scott goes into the Great Frozen North, and he's hanging out with Kim, and Kim is just trying to figure out what life means, right? She's had the band break up. She's had Steven go do his whole thing. She had this weird, vulnerable moment with Scott in the last book, and where when Scott saves her from the whole thing, and so. So she's been up there, and then she gets bored. So she gets a hold of Scott. Scott comes up to visit, and they go wandering through the wilderness. And I think that there's this really interesting moment. Let me find the page it's on. Before we get into that, we should probably talk about how Envy shows up, because she shows up before the trip north, and she has been in and out of Toronto, and tries to reestablish some sort of relationship with Scott, and it's demonstrated, I think, really interestingly, that she values something in Scott. Or values the potential of something in Scott that she can't have in anyone else in a relation, because Scott is the only one who would remember her kindly from before she was famous.
Yeah, back when she was just that nerd in the dorm room.
And she was just Natalie. And the funny thing is that at this point in the story, when when she comes to say that, Scott doesn't really remember that part because he's chosen to forget things about Natalie. And so his memory of Natalie's events, the things that they talk about in common, don't match up. And so you have Scott being confused when Natalie says things, and other people have said things like, "You were really drunk that New Year's Eve," and Scott's like, "I don't drink," which, that is a consistent story throughout the whole business of things, throughout the whole books series, is people will say, "Scott, you did this thing," and he's like, "That's not possible because of X. That's not possible because of Y." So I think that's sort of telling too, because it foreshadows the Canada thing. But I also find it really interesting because Envy is such a villain in Volume 3, right? Just this absolute like stone cold angry person, spiteful and awful, and to see her throughout this book be weirdly vulnerable and understand what she's left behind to or to at least understand that she left something behind to pursue her goal of being, an international star. That there was a cost to it, and that's something I think is interesting in this nature of it, because I think it gives some complexity to that. At least some of Envy in Volume 3 is her acting out of other issue of her history.
I think this is also playing onto almost I want to say like a power of three type thing, like a rule of three almost, between three of Scott's exes, which we're going to get to the third one in a minute. But we're seeing between her and Knives that people that Scott has been involved with in the past are growing up. Time has passed. This has been about a year since the first volume in chronological time within it. And everybody else has been going through all of these life changes, and Scott hasn't, because Scott basically, I don't even want to say represses his memories. He almost wipes them. Like, they are still there, but they're just like, they are repressed back in a closet to the point that he just doesn't even remember that they're there. Right. And there's a part of like why Scott doesn't grow, because he doesn't learn from his mistakes. He doesn't even learn from when he does things right, which is why like he'll do something right one time and then he'll mess it up after that. And everybody else is kind of even just passing him up. And I do think that's what the part where Knives is doing. I think that's what the part with Envy's doing, and we're about to get with Kim. And I think that's a big part of it too, since that's where the big explosion of that happens.
Oh, and let me see. There's a kind of a neat visual gag that plays several times in this volume. The memory cam, right, where Scott, he repeats a story and we see his cartoony, happy-go-lucky, fuzzy, animals in footy pajamas version.
Yeah, and it's almost like the memory's not even there. It's almost like he is just painting a memory in real time of how he wanted it to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I remember stuff, Scott says. I remember lots of stuff. So that's I don't know. I find that intriguing, especially as we look at the thing. So back to where we're at. Kim and Scott are in northern Ottawa, and they're hanging out in the bad weather, and they have this moment, and it's not on a numbered page, but basically Kim's speaking, encouraging Scott, trying to say, that there's hope, that there's future in there, and Scott leans over and gives her, this whopper of a kiss. Where's the camera there? There we are, right? Ta-da! There we go. And then their response, and it's 2 pages down because she starts to kiss back and then jumps in with the big fat no, and they have this conversation. And here, I think this is really Scott, because this reflects back on the end of volume 5. Scott says, "Haven't you been there for me this whole time? Things were always so complicated with Ramona, and you're so like uncomplicated. You've been the one constant in my life. Doesn't it make sense?"
Yes, it does.
It doesn't.
Yes, it does.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
10
make
years
it
from
look
now,
sense.
it's Scott and Kim are together.
No,
Ramona does not work
absolutely
out.
not. I can't believe you would want Kim to be that self-loathing and violated. I don't understand that. Kim deserves so much better than Scott.
I mean, sure.
She deserves to be entirely separated from Scott's memory and to go on.
All I'm saying is that the relationship with Ramona is not lasting.
It doesn't really matter because the fact is, I was right. Kim is totally the girl next door. And you guys lied to me.
No, I mean,
no, we did not lie to you.
You looked at my cartoon cat face and you said, "Oh, no, I don't think that makes sense for what we see here." And here it is.
No. We did not lie to you. You're reframing the situation.
Yeah, so the situation is like that's definitely like that's in play. That Kim has that memory, but the fact of the matter is that Scott misremembers their entire relationship, right? So Scott's whole belief is that like he's living out an Archie comic, and but they were high school sweethearts. I had to move away. It wasn't my fault, and he remembers telling that to Kim, but that's not what happened. We know from volume 4 that he told Lisa and Lisa told Kim, because Scott wouldn't talk to Kim at all. He just moved away to Toronto, right? And
I still think they're the best pair out of the characters that Scott could be with.
Let's hold off that fight for end. Let's get through where we're at.
All right.
Moving along. And then Kim says, "How can you even think that? Everything about our relationship was built on this horrible like codependence, and that because we have hurt everything about us has hurt people, everyone that we know." And Scott says, not to mention he screwed over poor Simon Lee. Well, we both did that, but that look on his face, and says Simon Lee was a bad guy, reflecting back to Scott's memory of the fight from volume 4. But that's actually not the case, because Simon was not some, big bad tough guy. He was some nerdy little Asian dude who got beat up. And then
he's not a video game character, which if this had been used to reframe everything, including the fights he's been having, I would be praising this work way more than I feel like there's a missed opportunity here structurally, but character arc wise, I don't want to derail too much from that, but this is a huge reframing. There used to be the River City Ransom video game frame up here, and now we just see it's just Scott being a jerk to an Asian kid.
But more importantly, he has convinced himself all this time that wasn't what happened.
Yes. Yeah.
My jaw hurt so hard when it hit the floor. I so was not ready for this moment.
Again, I feel like
really?
I feel like this could have been done even better by then reframing every other.
Because this was telegraphed this has been telegraphed since volume 2, actually since volume 1, that Scott's perceptions of things aren't real.
Yes, but the thing was, I never saw him as the bad. I mean, as not being the bad guy. I just saw Scott as putting himself as the victor. The whole time we have been talking about the unreliable narrator. I was never expecting this book to go out straight out and say, "Yep, here you go. Here's how it really happened." And that threw everything out of whack.
Right.
Suddenly, I was no longer reading a comic that may or may not be what I think it's supposed to be.
I don't think O'Malley lands the plane when he comes to applying this idea. I think it's a really fascinating one. He does not land it.
I
What
mean,
were you
And I
saying,
think part
Mel?
of that too, on why he doesn't land it is he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too. Like this is
Yes.
actually something I will agree with you in here,
Yeah.
and part of that too comes to the final fight that we're going to get to later, and how it's still, even though the final fight plays into this, right, and how we'll find out Gideon's been involved in some of this too. It still ends the same way everything has always ended.
Right.
So anyway, so Scott has had this realization. Kim has broken his brain, has demonstrated that he has been, misapplying his entire life under the thing. And here's part of the situation why I like this whole device. It's because I don't think there is a more true human dynamic than this. We are constantly painting ourselves as the heroes when we don't deserve it.
I always paint myself as the bad guy, but I like being the bad guy. So
Usually, I
You're,
paint
you're the
myself as the
least
bad guy
bad
too.
guy. You're one of the least bad guys I have ever met. But I mean, it's there's this human tendency to demonize the other and to valorize ourselves, right?
we main character syndrome ourselves. We're the main character
Absolutely,
of the story.
absolutely.
Everyone
Well,
else
and
is
think about
either
that. Like that's when that's the whole thing. Like all these people have things going on in the background and these stories that are happening around Scott, and Scott doesn't notice them because he's the main character. So how could somebody else live through that? I mean, because that's just how it is. So everybody else seems like
they're
an NPC.
NPCs.
They're really going through this stuff. So Scott's brain through this process has been broken, and he's starting to see that sometimes he's been the bad guy. I mean, we have little bits of this throughout the story, but this is such a foundational memory, as flimsy as it was. It's such a foundational memory to Scott that then he comes to face to face with the Nega Scott, who we have seen crop up since, was it volume 3 is the first time that guy shows up? I'm thinking.
Not sure. I only remember it in 4.
Yeah. I think, and he was in a couple of mirrors, and stuff too. But basically, there's this huge knockout, drag out fight between Scott and the Nega Scott, where he has to, and he can't defeat him. And this was a little on the nose. In the middle of the Scott, he's trying to, middle of the fight with Nega Scott, Kim says, "But if you keep forgetting all of your mistakes, you'll just keep making them." And Scott says, "I don't care. It's better than having to live with myself." And then Kim says, "Everything you've done wrong is just going to keep following you around, Scott."
This is another reason why I think that Kim and Scott are meant to be together, because this is arguably one of his most important character moments, and she's there for it.
It was amazing to me to realize that Kim started out as seemingly the most pointless character and ended up pretty much being the most important character.
I'd argue that's been since the previous volume, because she's the one who sends she's the one who reads
Oh,
the
yeah.
lies to
In
him.
general, over the course
Yeah.
of the 6 books.
So
I think she was kind of set up for that as
Right.
early as volume 2.
Mhm.
Right. There was a longer payoff for it, but it was set up as early as volume 2.
You remember
that she
there was a
gonna
point
be
where
one of the most
it
important.
was in volume 2. I had no idea why they were suddenly focusing on her, because she seemed so, irrelevant to the rest of the story. By the time we got to the 4th book, she had just like taken the spotlight practically, and here she's practically the hero of the story.
right. Well, and that comes to the thing is like, so Scott has been affected by his own desire to lionize himself, right? But Kim doesn't. Like, Kim's loathing of humanity is equal parts her lack of patience with people that are stupid, and the fact that she's carrying some guilt from her past, right? So she's one of the only people in the story that's actually looking at things as they are, right? She's trying to figure herself out. She's not 100% there. She's 23, but or 24. But she's looking at the world as it is. And I think that's one of the things that separates her from the other characters, which is also why she's entirely. I mean, if the problem with the Scott Kim dynamic is that she would be mothering Scott.
I do have to. That's assuming that Scott stays who he is and doesn't actually grow to a point where he'd be worthy of her.
Catching up to do. The idea that Kim should hang around.
I feel like you're backing up one of my points. Maybe not both at once, but I feel like you're backing up one of them. Either Scott's not developing, or he does in fact deserve her.
No, but if we go to, I'm not sure, is it the next page? Whenever we get finished with this scene, right? The result is Scott has to stop fighting and be willing to accept his past, right, and move on from it.
Yeah, it's classic shadow work, which is very bluntly thrown in your face from the fact that he's literally fighting his shadow. It's not so subtle at all, but it's like I'd rather do that than live with myself. And if you know about the shadow, it is literally the core of you, like the part of you that you don't want to embrace, the one who's willing to do the things that need to be done. And he finally embraces his shadow by remembering his past and all the actual crummy things that he's done.
Right.
Well, and one of the things, and the interesting thing about the things that he's remembering, are he's largely remembering the ways he's actually hurt Ramona, right? The fact that like he believes, I mean, like in volume 4, he says that, she says, "You're the nicest guy I've ever dated." He says that's kind of sad, right? But he still has this idea that once I defeat the evil X's, we're going to be happy forever. But the fact is that since he's like living his own shadows, he's avoiding his own history, he's avoiding his own past, he still is a pretty crappy boyfriend in ways that I don't believe, based on the way this frame works with him intentionally forgetting things, he's capable of understanding that he was crappy. Right?
And that's, to me, is what the character development for him in this book was really about. His path towards, turning himself around and getting his life together happened in book 4. But then he had a relapse, or he's in danger, really, of having this relapse once Ramona's gone.
No, it's full relapse. He doesn't have the job.
Yeah, it's not danger. It is 100% full relapse.
The point is, if he's really going to move forward, he has to get over himself on the inside, not just make decisions on the outside.
Well, and part of the situation too is like he was doing, and the volume 5 is pretty explicit about this. He's doing all of these things just for her, not because he feels that that's important for him to do. So he's not self-actualized, and part of that is that he didn't bear the weight of his own guilt.
Yeah, and I do like that in a lot of stories where you can have a character who has a lot of changing to do, but you don't just make them a saint overnight. You have them get to that point where, they're at least able to set a direction for themselves, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be facing stumbling blocks, doesn't mean they're not going to be facing temptations and struggles that are going to want to pull them back to their old self. And so you can have this up and down for a little while until they finally manage to conquer that final mountain and get over the real hurdles.
Well, I guess the way that I would put it, because we are looking back, was like 2 books ago is when a lot of people think a lot of Scott's major development happened. But I would think that not really any development happened then. Not really. Like, because up to this point, anything that he did before that was kind of just fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like he started doing the things that everybody told him he needed to do to start.
I do not resonate with that at all. I have problems with that.
I mean, it took a lot of willpower to do. I wouldn't say that he was just playing a part or something.
Well, no, but he's still not doing it for his own sake. He's still doing it because people tell him he should. Right? So you have that. So like you have that comment in at the end of 4 when he's fighting with Roxy and Roxy calls him a pussy, and Scott says to Ramona, says, "Am I really a pussy?" And she says, "You could be less of one." Well, then you see him kind of stepping up to that a bit in 5, but it's not because he's really realized that about himself. It's because somebody else told him to. And this is the thing that I would push back against some of your perspective, a Twitless. is that on Scott's development is after he absorbs Mega Scott, after he acknowledges his own frailty. Everything Scott does from that point on, at least as far as I read, is a volitional choice he's making. He's not just a consequentialist in it. He's not just doing that because it happens that way. He's actively.
He's not just running through the motions.
And so as a reintegrated person, he's then making these choices forward, and that happens when he acknowledges and accepts the failings of his past.
Yeah, he had to take a phone call, but so I don't even know if he heard that. I don't know if he can listen to both at the same time.
No!
But I would say one thing where I tend to agree with some of the statements Twitless has been making through this entire series is while it is part of the actual development that Scott's having, I do feel that there are some shortcuts being taken here with a lot of this, especially with the integration and the shadow work. I like this book way more than the previous one. If you remember at the end, I said that the previous one was my least favorite of the 6 volumes. This one, I think it brings back the level of the humorous atmosphere in a way that it actually complements the tension going on and doesn't cut from it because it was kind of rushed together and stuff. But a lot of this is shortcut of I'm fighting my shadow. I've beaten my shadow, right? Like a lot of it's just like this really fast, snappy. I'm just telling you, showing you that this is happening really quick, but it doesn't really have the weight that it should have because of the shortcuts.
Anyone who has watched Endgame or The Rise of Skywalker or the last Jurassic World movie knows what it's like for a final installment to have basically have way too much stuff still left over and be trying to cram it all in that final installment. I do think I felt a little bit of that happening in this.
Oh God, I don't.
Oddly enough,
yeah, I don't.
It wasn't
that
to
much.
a point where I felt it was detrimental to the story.
I think if you put anything, I think if you try to take any one of those threads and pull on them and make anything more out of it, it would turn into horrible, irredeemable, painful slop.
Yeah, I don't think this one definitely wasn't rushed, and I think that's another reason why the atmosphere of humor. He got to work on this after filming wrapped up. Like half of this book was done after they were done with the movie, so he wasn't like rushed to finish it or anything. I feel like the execution of some of the stuff that matters for the whole series is better, but where I think some of these shortcuts come down to is maybe a lack of O'Malley's writing ability, right? Where he has some concepts that he wants to try to juggle and he wants to work with, but he just isn't there yet as a writer, so they just kind of fall a little flat.
Well, how long has he been working on these books?
2003 to 2012.
Yeah, I mean, he worked on it for about a decade. He even puts it in at the very end.
I mean, I've talked about how, I mean, really, in general, every book was getting progressively better. And of course, you know, you guys were all there when I somehow...
Well, I think his writing ability has progressed throughout it. But just because your ability progresses doesn't mean you're ever or always quite where you might want to be for certain things you want to tackle. You know, some people hit different things at different paces.
So, okay. So Scott heads back, and this is one of those moments that probably, what's his name? That you Cartoonicus did not care for, but I absolutely love this page right there. Scott Pilgrim is coming home, and this time it's personal.
To be honest, what I called the eye candy last week was may not have been up to par with book 4, but it was much better than it was in book 5. And it was it took about 40 pages, but they finally it got back to actually being references and, you know, to stuff and not just random excerpts. So I did appreciate most of it.
So,
And it was often funny. That's the other thing. Again, I did not feel like they were trying to make a joke, and it just, wasn't actually a joke.
so I also really appreciated Envy realizing she's in the middle of this intractable, horrible situation with Gideon and dealing with
I was
levels of
very glad that
expectations
she
in it.
finally had a finalization to her story that she didn't get in book 3.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. So, so Gideon goes to. I'm not Gideon. Scott goes to the fancy club, which is a subterranean club built in an old
The
building.
Chaos Theater.
The Chaos Theater.
This was some clever visual. They're using the chessboard.
Using the chessboard, using the obelisks,
Which
and
is
also
a
I really
Mother
or two
reference.
pyramids. I also really loved this gag right there, the elevator. Oh, it's not really
Mhm.
showing up. There you go. That's
I
the
wouldn't
one.
even call it gag, but I thought it was clever visual.
Yeah. I thought that was really fun.
Yeah. They used that one in
And on the
the movie.
next page, no. This is another thing. His art has taken so many leaps and bounds since the first book.
Probably because he's not the only one working on the book.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he's still doing all of the main characters, but that also lets him focus on all the main characters. This book and even parts of the previous one were done in almost that manga way. There was a separate inker who also did the people, like in the crowd scenes and stuff, and there was a guy who did a lot of the backgrounds as well.
Well, yeah, there's an
works. I
art
have
assistant
liked the
and a
artwork
junior
for
assistant.
book 4.
Yeah, which is usually how they do that in manga. Is like a mangaka will have like a couple of assistants that help out.
Okay, so what are the junior assistants? Aaron and Chetta. I'm sure I know that name.
I'm not familiar with it.
You're looking for
I'll have to look that up. I'm sure I recognize that name. Anyway, so he goes and he faces off with Gideon, and
Well, before that happens, there is also one major breakthrough. Just want to point out.
oh yeah, on his way, he's seen all these people at the club, and he runs into young Neil and introduces young Neil to his sister Stacy. For some reason, they had never actually
I'm not showing
spoken.
the joke here, which is actually right.
Yeah.
He goes, "So this is young. This is Neil."
Yeah,
And I just cracked up so
Yeah.
much.
But I think because the person who always introduces him as young Neil to other people is Scott. Because when other people yell at him, they just call him Neil, right? And I think part of that too it was Scott not growing because as far as he always saw Neil is the younger brother of their former bandmate Steph, right? But
Wasn't it
Scott
Stacey?
is actually no, it's Stacy's
okay.
sister.
Sister.
Steph,
Derp.
yeah.
Sorry, I had a
Steph
brain
was
fart.
Neil's sister.
Right.
And went back with whatever the blanking on the band name with Stills and Envy, but he's the
Right.
younger brother of their former bandmate.
Kid Chameleon.
Yeah, Kid Chameleon. And now, since Scott is actually, aware, right? He is in a state of awareness. He's not just drifting anymore.
Oh, I wish
It's
Twitless
like,
was
well,
here.
Neil is an adult too, right? Like, why am I still calling him young Neil? Like he's this high schooler that was around when we were doing our band. So he just calls him Neil.
And he's actually older than Stacy.
Yeah, he is.
More importantly, is Scott is respecting someone else and seeing them
Yep.
as another human being.
Yeah, but like,
Indeed,
so
indeed.
you would have to look from his perspective. Even though Neil's older than Stacy, Scott might have even seen him as younger in his head, just because he's still looking at it as his former bandmate's younger brother.
And what was interesting is the whole time, every time he would show up in a book, I kept trying to figure out if there was actually any connection to the plot. Again, this seems like another completely useless character, yet he's always in there because he'd be like dating knives or something. And there's always something that seemed like it was important. I'm like, is this going to go anywhere? And while it didn't become some major plot device or anything, I was so glad to see that, okay, it has kind of fit into Scott's story in the end. And I can really appreciate that.
Right. So Scott then goes to confront Gideon, and they're having their big fight. And then Gideon reaches into Scott's chest and pulls out the power of love. And one of the big things that is a factor in all of that is that Scott is that they realize just before that Gideon's coming to take Ramona back, but Ramona isn't with Scott. So the fact they have is a fight between them, not about. I mean, it's about Ramona, but Ramona isn't in the middle of all of that. So you have a different sort of perspective in all of that. And Scott, of course, he gets the power of love stolen from his chest, and it's a level down, which I thought was a great little device that it's fun to look at. Gideon stole the power of love. What a dick. That's what the text says. And then Scott has, of course, he's Gideon's able to kill him because he's been leveled down, and Gideon's the final boss.
And for the
And I thought
first
this would make
time-
Twitless really happy because he likes to see Scott fail so much. I thought that he'd get a real kick out of this, but he's not
Well,
even here to.
And
talk
for
about
the
it.
first time in this whole series of people supposedly, I do finger quotes, dying, here we have actual violence. Nobody's turning into coins here. He actually stabs him through the chest and, causes what we would consider in real life actual physical damage.
Yep.
There's
Yeah,
got to be
Gandalf.
something to that, and I don't
And
know
also-
what it is.
2 pages later, we've got this mark, just in case you're curious about what it was. Scott is in fact dead.
Yeah.
That,
So,
that.
This was an interesting page too, because I think I brought it up when we were talking about it
Equalized
at the
every
beginning.
character.
But this page, as part of the book, was influenced by the movie. So a lot of the book was finished up to the whole Nega Scott portion before the final parts of the movie were made. And because of the editing of the movie and the movie being finished and him seeing it, there was a scene much like this where as Scott is killed, everybody's faces come up next to Gideon's because they're shocked to see Scott dead. And he liked it so much, he's like, oh, that has to be a page in the book when we get to finishing it.
And can I point out how interesting it is that Kim looks up even though she's nowhere near any of this?
Like a gray disturbance in the force was felt.
Exactly. That was kind of cool.
Yep. So Scott then wakes up in this great desert of his own mind, right? There is the great and
I love
drinks
it.
are on me joke.
There's just one page, just a blank white page.
There were
Yeah,
several blank white
Yeah, there's
pages.
several.
What's that? Oh, that's right. He did this. I totally forgot.
So he's crying, I'm dead, this sucks. And Ramona is there, and they have a heart-to-heart talk. So this is Scott's dead, and the chapter title, Don't Let It Get You Down. Which I love. I absolutely love that. It's hilarious. I think the chapter titles in this volume are some of the funniest in the entire series. They had me cracking up more than once. Going back and rereading it. And part of the heart to heart that I want to focus on is on page 133 in the black and white. Ramona Scott Ramona had said on the previous page, I kind of disappeared for a while, I guess. I don't know. Looking for myself. That sounds stupid. And going on to say, I'm sorry I left in those last few days. I was pretty messed up. I didn't want you to get messed up. And Scott says, I got kind of messed up anyway. And Ramona's response is, but you're so tough, right? And so she was, it's really interesting that she was interpreting Scott's, refusal to acknowledge the past as resilience on Scott's behalf.
She even previously said it was like a superpower that he could get over things so quickly.
Right. Right. And that was something. And so we actually see that her perspective of Scott is also not entirely accurate to what Scott was. And that's why I think is that's interesting, because it also reflects on some of the reason that she was with Scott to begin with, was that she's looking for somebody who's stable and resilient, right?
Yeah, and that's something that was also kind of set up a long time ago. Like, it even gets rehashed when she and Envy have their conversation before the fight with Todd.
That's right.
Where Envy's kind of like trying to let her know, it's like, yeah, maybe they're not so different.
Right. So eventually they have this heart-to-heart talk, and eventually Scott says, I lied, or not Scott, Ramona says, I lied, you actually are dead. And then we recall that from Volume 3, Scott had an extra life that he picked up in Volume 3.
They did a good job of making me forget that.
No, it actually leads into probably my favorite. I guess you could call a joke, because it's kind of like a punt line. But my favorite bit in the whole thing is when Stacy's on the phone with her mom, and the person who actually remembers is like, it's a false alarm.
Right,
and I told you Scott had a 1-up in Volume 3.
Right, because
and
I totally had forgotten about it, and they were having to remind me. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's right.
It's not even just that. The thing that made me laugh is that of all people who remembered, who knew this bit of information, which means Stacy had to have told her in the first place, was his mom.
Mom, the person who never knows that you can't, pause online games, who calls everything a Nintendo.
Well, in fairness, these are more like Nintendo rules than online game rules. So Scott and Ramona, after Scott comes back to life, Ramona bursts out of his chest, and they face off Gideon, and we see Gideon's master plan is to collect his 7 exes that rejected him, so that when they're ready to and froze them, and when they're ready, so that when they're ready, he can thaw them out and date them. Which, what did you guys think about that plot point? That seemed like it came out of absolutely nowhere. But what did you guys think of it?
Well, no. So I missed that part. If you're saying that was his plan to wait until he could date them.
No, he said that. Like words come right out of his mouth.
I don't know how I missed that. But I was just taking it as he's a control freak, right? And he can't let them go in general, which was fine enough for me.
Yeah.
He has this paints that he has an obsessive nature, right? So he does have some things in common with Scott, but almost for like different reasons. And even Ramona's like, you didn't even care until I left. And it's because he's the type of guy who just obsesses about everything that he's doing, including the girls that he was interested in. I thought this was a really good bit for getting me to very much dislike a villain, and I like that. It made Gideon very punchable to me.
I think
probably the first and only villain in this who actually felt like a real villain, who didn't have some
he is the only real villain
of redeeming.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't think that's necessarily. I mean,
but even there were some weird things about him.
So like the twins, almost like Scott more. They're sad they have to beat him up, because if he could only see what a dirtbag Ramona is, then Scott could be saved. I think
you could argue Todd is a villain, but he's
I would argue Todd is absolutely a villain.
I think Todd's a douchebag. I think the twins are
that's
villains.
Why I'm saying you could argue. I actually don't think, in a classical sense, you could label anyone before Gideon as a villain.
The twins technically kidnaps. If we're going off of crime, right?
Yeah, crime. They are criminals.
Todd's just a douche, but like. The twins technically
he broke vegan law.
What?
He broke vegan law.
He broke vegan law.
Okay.
It's not illegal to cheat on your girlfriend with the bass player and with the drummer, but it is wrong.
Right.
It's probably more wrong than many crimes.
Can I put it this way?
Not kidnapping, though.
Even watching
as wrong as kidnapping.
Let me put it this way. Even watching the movie, before any of this, where Lucas Lee had none of the characterization that he got in the book and was a total jerk. it still felt awkward to see people blowing up, turning into coins, etc., etc. Gideon is the first time I can actually see it as, all right, the villain needs to be dispatched, and that's okay.
Fair. And like I was already pretty okay with, just because of the level of smugness, the level of machinations, the level of harm that he was willing to see happen to people around. I can see that as villainous, and the fact that all of the evil X's were ostensibly okay with Scott's death, even if that wasn't what they wanted, they were okay with that. That puts them in the rank of villain as far as I'm concerned.
He's okay with them dying, though. I don't know if I'm
the
sorry. I don't know. I feel like the morality there gets really wibbly.
No, I'm not saying that Gideon isn't more evil.
Can I introduce one final thing here that I learned from Brian Lee O'Malley, which actually makes it better and then also worse?
Oh, I love that idea. Hit me.
So apparently people got hung up on the thing I got hung up on, which is the fact that these guys are technically dying left and right.
Right.
And there was even apparently an alternate scene in the movie that was going to be filmed where it's like, Scott Pilgrim's actually a serial killer because all these people are dying. So Brian Lee O'Malley apparently said and he said, this is canon. You can look this up. It was on his blog, and people said, what actually happened to the evil X's when they die? Like, what's going on here? He said they respawn at their houses, having learned their lesson. Canon.
Oh my gosh!
That fits the video game logic too.
Yes,
I love it. I love it so much. Even Gideon, though, please tell me Gideon says that.
So I think they said it to all of them. So here's my thing. This simultaneously makes everything better and worse at the same time.
Yeah.
It makes it better because I no longer have to wrestle with that whole he's killing these people. And Lucas Lee is alive, so I'm okay with that.
This is the first I've heard about this too, but I've also
But it makes so much sense.
So
I can't believe we never.
The problem that makes it worse.
Read his blog. It needs to be in a book or medium.
Yes, I'm saying. Do you think
the show should put this in here?
I was going to say, do you think
Pilgrim takes off?
Do you think the show will do it? I think it should.
I hope they really should. Yeah.
Well, and so here's the great thing about the Lucas Lee bit. Just to put a little sugar on this for you, Twitless. So Scott and Lucas could have got along in a different life. Now they can.
Yeah, I know that makes it a little better for
me. They're both it's a new life for both of them. Scott got his one up, uses how to use his one up, and Lucas respawns back at home. So then they can hang out in this next line.
It makes it better for me, but it also makes it way worse from a story structure point, which is something I keep coming back to because
I understand your hang up on it, but I think that's utterly superfluous. I don't think
I don't. Well, let me finish because to me it wreaks havoc with the stakes here, and it brings me back to a criticism I've had since day one, which is I feel like Brian Lee O'Malley, the slice of life stuff I think has got a lot of solid, and I think it's actually the real story here. I think that the action scenes are kind of just trappings, and honestly I feel like they're not very well executed in certain ways.
Here's what's
from a coherency standpoint. They're executed well for Flash, and that for some people that's fine. What I'm saying is that learning that extra bit there plays havoc with the stakes because it's they all just die and respawn. Who gives a crap about the action stuff? Brings me back. Let me finish. Which brings me back to the fact that the action stuff really isn't why we're here.
Yeah,
we're here because of an emotional journey, and I'm I'm okay with that. But then the action, I really just
So I would actually have liked it if that was put into the book from the beginning, because one of the things and this is where we don't see eye to eye here, is that I think all of it is a platter for serving the humor ultimately, and I think that would actually have raised the humorous level of the book if it was actually in it.
Yeah.
And you can write.
It still lowers the dramatic stakes for me.
It depends. You can create your own stakes.
Scott. The other thing to look at it is Scott was able to die, for the reals die,
and that's what I was gonna say.
I don't believe that. I feel like he would just have respawned at home too.
No. Here's the thing.
We're going with Brian Lee O'Malley's logic, which he is bringing
out. He had to have the one up. right? Because like his sister calls because he thinks he's dead, and he had to have the one up.
It doesn't make sense, and that's what I keep running into. Every wall I try to make sense with it. It's just not. So I'm giving up, and I'm giving up on it. I'm just saying that because I'm giving up, I am also giving up on my investment in the stakes. Like that is a consequence of structuring it this way.
Well, I think it's a consequence of it being basically a video game, right? Because bad guys can respawn in video games, right? Can the main character respawn if they have a life? Yes. Otherwise,
infinitely.
you have to start the game all the way over.
And
Put
that's
100 coins in.
to me about the fact that when Gideon stabs both Scott and Ramona, there is actual blood there, right? Because you do have to worry about fate losing the game in a video game. As for the characters being able to come back, the thing is, at the end of the game, you move on. And you're never going to fight those characters again. So he may say that in this universe, that's how it works. But for Scott and Ramona, it's not as if those characters are ever going to be able to hurt them again.
Yeah, also in a lot of beat 'em up games,
just...
which the beat 'em up game genre is the one that he obviously plays into the most. Sure. In a lot of beat 'em up games, especially around the time this started getting made, after you beat a boss or certain characters, you can unlock them as playable characters.
Oh gosh.
Okay, that's it again, but the problem is that like the
So here's the question.
I'm done.
We're gonna one more comment and I'll think. But Twitless, are you in fact going to commission any Scott and Lucas bro picks? Are you gonna be just like, have them going bowling, fishing?
If I had extra money, and I ran into Brian Lee O'Malley at a con, and I was going to commission a piece from him, it would be that piece. It would be the two of them playing video games together, going just like chilling. that would be the piece.
Yeah,
and I would want it. I would want him to write on the bottom corner, and on the bottom right hand corner, I would have to have a little thing that says "This is canon."
That would be amazing.
So for me, I'm never going to be one to take something that comes from the outside and apply it to my experience.
Word of God.
What?
No, you're not one who recognizes word of God, which is like when the author has not put something inside any of the materials. You're just going off of something that they've said.
It's
right.
the TV.
You have to
it's
come
the TV
back to me later on and fix your story with some detail that wasn't in there. It should have been in there in the first.
It might be in the show.
That's why I hope it's in the show.
That would help.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm still going to take this overall as the emotional story it is. And that's what I have to look at when we can move forward with this. On that note, Gideon is still the only real villainous villain as far as I'm concerned.
I would put him in the twins because they put like kidnapping and more kidnapping. I'm like, you were going to jail.
I would also like to point out the level of blood that gets spilled in this first sword fight is just impressive. Okay, so it's Hong Kong levels. Okay, so let's Gideon is just slicing up at Scott and Ramona with the power of love, and they're both losing blood over it. And
take that as he's somehow their hearts are being broken.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that well, I think it has to do with the fact that like they're fighting for their lives. He's saying that neither of them are capable of survival or worthy of love, and I think that's a big factor because one of the things that you have,
he gets inside your head.
Yeah, because he's
been inside both of their heads since the beginning.
Right. So,
that changes.
He's in their heads. Get it?
So one of the things that I disliked about the reveal of Gideon's machinations, right? Is this panel right here, right? It says that because the glow, which is the idea of not dealing with your emotions honestly, says, wow, she's been riding the glow into subspace. That makes sense. But the thing is that like the way it lays out is that Gideon's ability to affect people and to tweak with their emotions because he's in the music industry and all the politics there has given him some control over people's sense of awareness, and specifically has infected Ramona with it. But Ramona learned about subspace from her ninja girlfriend, right? So that seems like a continuity error.
No. Because he's not saying that that's how she gets into subspace, right? Because she can't. She can get into it manually by going through doors and stuff. It's just that she's figured out how to use the glow to also ride it into subspace. It's
Well,
like
I'm a little with
shortcut.
Reese. I like I said, O'Malley is not. I think his strengths of a storyteller is he's I think he's got a couple. Okay, so I'm not saying he doesn't have strengths. One of them, I think his biggest strength is the emotional storytelling. That's the thing that invests you the most, and he's able to use this kind of he's able to resonate with the pop culture references with a lot of people, not necessarily me, but he's able to kind of play the humor and the flash, and that is, I think, why this work is remarkable. I think his weaknesses are in structure and in making the pieces interlock like other storytellers who are really like king of doing that. Even with Gideon's machinations, I didn't feel like, oh wow, this has been there the whole time. I was kind of like, oh, okay,
well, unless
that's the thing, I guess.
So unless I again missed something that was right in front of my face, which has been pretty par for the course somehow for this whole series, I totally did not pick up anything that explained. They explained that he could get into your head. I never saw anything that explained why he could get in your head.
Because that's his video game power. But I feel like there's so much when you have the power to get inside someone's head, and this is, I think it's partly because like I'm actually a very psychologically manipulative person. There's so much you can do. And O'Malley's like, it's like a really cool place to have a fight scene, bro. which leads us to this.
Well, yeah, that's anime in a nutshell.
And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I give up again.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that he did do, though. Gideon is like, I don't think he's a genius. I think he's an idiot savant, right? Because like he even said he was in Scott's head, and he was one of the reasons a lot of Scott's memories were tweaked. He made them a lot more badass than they were before, right? And it's like, man, you had access to this guy's head, and that's what you chose to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's probably
feel that the movie portrayed him a lot more. I was almost surprised. I was actually kind of surprised that they did kill him off in the movie, because I almost felt like the way he was being portrayed, he would end up being the, surprisingly the, how do I say that, the final test that Scott had to pass in order, to change. And that he was just there to show him the way, and that he wasn't actually a villain. Totally not the case here at all. Right? He actually has a villainous plot. He is going after them directly. I don't know. Am I crazy?
I'm not sure. So
I think he's being treated like a video game boss, right? And often you don't necessarily learn the mechanic or what you need to do to beat the boss while you're fighting the boss. I mean, maybe if you're just not super familiar, but if you get like a new power or skill or anything like that, you get it right before the boss you're going to have to use it on.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, in the movie, the effect that he seemed so unvillainous in the movie that I wasn't even sure that he was there to be an antagonist versus there to be like, this has all been one big way of teaching you a lesson.
They did make him seem more petty and spiteful in the movie than this megalomaniacal maniac. I mean, he was definitely still a villain and the most villainous person in that movie. But
I seriously was not sure.
It's not to the level that this is.
So, Scott goes into Ramona's head as she is dying, and they have this big old fight where Scott basically headbutts Gideon and causes him to lose his control of his mental projection inside of Ramona's head. And then Scott's cut in half, completely cut in half, and not dead because it's inside of Ramona's head. and which basically causes Ramona to wake up from her delusion within her own mental projection inside of her head and grow into a giant and banish, essentially banish Gideon from her own mind.
Did she grow into a giant, or did he get minimized in her head?
He had gotten minimized after the headbutt, but it looks like she's much taller. You look at this panel here, a couple pages before that there.
Well, I understand there's a size difference, but I'm saying,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it more that like he's no longer important to her, therefore
Well-
he has been made small?
It could be. I think he's roughly the same size as the two halves of Scott on the floor there in that page.
I've gotten ahead or something.
Yeah, you are ahead, but but anyway, so that they're banished from the mind, and that page you had there. They have flashed back into the real world. Ramona has been healed of her stab wounds, and Gideon is trying to cut them both to smithereens, and she deflects that with her badger bag, which is a subspace portal bag, wherein she holds all of her things.
You know how in a game you can have like this massive inventory space? It suddenly hit me what that darn
It's a bag of
is.
holding.
Yeah.
It's a bag of holding.
Yep. So, anyway, so Ramona ends up the bag as it's expelling everything else out of all of her luggage. As Ramona's getting rid of all of her baggage, she gains the power of love, which is once again just a little bit on the nose, right? But I like it anyhow. And
Scott got it, and she needed to catch up.
Yeah. So she gains the power of love, and in the colored version, it's just a regular colored sword. Weird.
Why? What are you looking at?
Oh, the power of love sword that Ramona's got there in that picture.
What were you picturing?
I was always picturing it being pink.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it got plenty of blood on it. It was pink at one point.
Yeah, there you go. And then Scott then realizes how much Gideon is like himself, right? With his need to control, need to not be held accountable for his own mistakes. And Scott levels up, gaining the power of understanding. Which I don't know. I kind of felt like that. Like it makes sense in this story perspective to have that happen at this moment, but I really feel like he kind of already, is operating from that place of self-understanding from the time he gets the bus trip home.
I think he just needed to find closure with all, each of the characters. At
Could
least
be.
we, the audience, needed to find that closure.
I suppose that makes sense. All the people he talks to on the way in
Right.
and has the opportunity to really come to grips with that.
Right.
That does make sense.
It was important to wrap this stuff up one way or another.
So anyway, moving along to not skip point by point here. Basically, there's a big sword fight, in which case Scott with the Berserk sword and Ramona with the power of love face off against Gideon, who's got himself a sword he'd hidden in Envy's costume. And they have this whole sword fight that's really just a clever disguise for an argument about what relationships mean. And then they kill Gideon, and he bursts into 7 million coins. He burst into 7 million coins, so he's not really dead. Anyway.
Why do games always give you the greatest reward after you can no longer use it?
That's a good question. it's also great because when he bursts into 7 million coins, this has an amazing. I love this gag on this next page, right?
Yes.
Is that everybody, like the whole audience, looks up and they're like, "Oh man, this is so amazing and magical!" And then the coins start hitting them. Ow! Ow! Ow!
Yeah.
Ow!
Cartoons, because I think the problem is, and modern games should change it. Some do. It's a holdover from when score was the important part of games,
Right.
right? So even if you couldn't use the money, it was part of your score. So getting that big bonus at the end gave you a high score. It's just not as important in modern games, and I wish more developers would realize that.
Memes aside, the real thing, it's for New Game Plus.
In some games, it can be,
So, so anyway, Scott and Envy, after the whole thing is over, Envy shows up. It looks like it might be a second villain battle, but really it's Envy apologizing for not being not being great, and Scott understanding that's the whole thing. And then all of the 7 frozen X's are thawed and don't know how they got there. And Scott talks to all of his friends, la da 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 da. And then they have this necessary exposition for where Ramona was this whole time. Turns out she went to her dad's place in the mountains for like 3 months. And
It's too bad that for a book that puts a lot of emphasis on music, you can never hear any of it. I can only assume that will be something that will make the cartoon about 1,000 times better.
I mean, you could have in the first book. There were chords. It was really bad, but there were chords next to their opening song if you wanted to play
can't
it.
feel and experience moments like this where it's supposed to mean something.
that's
You
true.
can imagine it, but
So, over on page 223, Scott and Ramona are on the elevator ride up, and they are talking in the elevator. And they're both exhausted, the whole thing, la da da da. And Scott says, "Things can't be the same, can they?" And Ramona replies, "Things were never the same. Change is what we get." Which is also funny, considering that $7 million in coins just rained down on the audience, right? Yeah. And Ramona says, "I guess that's my problem. I'm always trying to beat the clock and outrun the universe. Like nothing can change me as long as I change first. I feel like I'm in this river getting swept along, and if I hold on to anyone, or if I'm holding on for dear life, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm stuck, and I never want to be stuck." Right? And the interesting thing about this is that one of the things that I think about this observation is that when we look back on what she just told all of their friends about where she's been for the last 3 months, is that she was just stuck at home, right? She wasn't doing anything else with her life. She is stuck, and that she's been stuck in the past, even though she was trying to not be. Which is I think that's intriguing to look back on that. So then Scott's response, I don't know, maybe we can get somewhere together. Maybe we can get unstuck. We'd have to be careful. It could be a bumpy ride. It could be messy, but maybe it'd be worth it. Maybe we just need to hold on. Ramona says, "I've never been good at holding on." You'll get it. It just takes practice, right? And that's the last line before the denouement, which I don't know if we want to dissect all of that, but yeah. So
I also like the part where they played Believer. by
oh
the
yeah, that's
Monkees,
hilarious.
And the only 2 people that could ever be their fans have sadly gotten older and grown some taste.
I was just happy that he and Kim are still friends.
Yeah. Well, and Kim moves back to Toronto. That's elucidated in the back of it.
Right.
And Steve's gay.
I think even more than that too. I'm happy that they're actually finally friends, right?
Right.
Or in the so that it's reciprocal, right? It's not just like Kim is Scott's friend, Scott can be Kim's friend.
Right. This was a story that took that girl next door trope and somehow subverted it in a way that it still worked out on both levels.
Yeah. And they've actually even kind of pointed that out before too, with like Roxy, how like Scott never remembers anyone, but everyone remembers Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Scott had a lot of friends, but he was never really most people's friend,
Right.
because of the way he was.
Well, and I mean, even thinking about in Volume 5, like he like Stacy shows up throughout the course of the books, but like Scott has a brother that he forgets about, right?
Yeah.
Because it's it wasn't intrinsically part of Scott's life, So I think that's an interesting thing to look at, seeing Scott being an integrated person and being able to learn from the good and the bad, is I think where we kind of end up with that one. And I guess I can kind of understand the idea that it's happening because you're seeing it told more than shown in relation to your previous statement, Twitless. But I just think there are so many intentional actions throughout the course of the second half of the book that I think you get to see those played out, even if they're in the metaphor of the big boss fight. But yeah, Knives goes away to college, and Scott and Ramona disappear into subspace together, vowing to try again, and that's the thing. So, end of the story. Okay, we stayed longer than we planned on with that. So let's try to get some final thoughts on it. And Twitless, overall, as a package, as a 6-volume thing, did you still hate it?
I don't think I've ever hated it. I just don't like it. But I can appreciate some of the things it does. Like I said, I think I've already kind of said what I think O'Malley does well. It's not for me. It's yeah, that's about it. I think the final bit is, I think this is the type of story that you resonate with if you identify with Scott on some level. I think even the humor hits better if you are someone who you are like Scott in some ways, or you know someone that you really like who is like Scott. I think that the sort of failure to launch aspect of it speaks very well to both millennials and certain parts of Gen X. And I think that kind of aspect of, I think that resonates really strongly with people. I am not like Scott. And people like him actually really, certain people that I know who are like him really bug me. Not all, but I think that really, at the end of the day, partly is, like I said, I've only partially known people like Scott, and I've almost never gotten along with them. And I am very much the polar opposite of him as a person. And I think that is distinctly impacting how I approach this as well.
So you've never been the best fighter in Ottawa?
No, I haven't.
No, it was Ontario that he was
Ontario.
the best fighter in.
You're right.
How would you have felt then if this story had given us, say, 10 times the actual character development on him?
I don't need 10 times. All I really needed to see is I just needed to see. I still don't. There's a couple of things at the end of the story that I still really don't know for myself. I don't know what decisions Scott actually makes distinctly that are different from what he would actually do in terms of choices from like book 1 or at least by book 4. So I'm like, what actual decisions does he make that are different than what he was before? I don't really know what those are. And secondly, I don't really see what Scott and Ramona see in each other on a deep level. I still feel it's like, you're kind of nice and you're kind of different. And I'm like, they're starting over. And I'm like, okay, good luck. I just don't feel invested in it. That's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. So, Cartoonicus.
I want to go last.
Oh, all right. It's my show, but sure. Metal. What are you've read this book? These books
100 times.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've read it that much, but many times.
Many.
Yeah.
Did this reading change or widen your appreciation of anything with it?
No, no. But I think I've read it enough, and I've thought about the book enough that it's like I take some of what Twitless is saying to heart, but I've considered quite a bit of what he's said before.
Sure.
That after you experience something more than 10 times, and you're actually like sitting in it, you're not just going through the motions like skim reading something. You've probably thought about it enough that you're not going to really change your opinion on it unless somebody like points out something that just completely blows your mind.
Sure.
So, I guess for my take on it, I wouldn't necessarily say I identify it with Scott in any kind of like direct fashion. I mean, nobody is as they ought to be, so we all fail to live up to where we should be, where we could be. And so in that, the idea that's Scott's kind of a loser. I think everybody, if you aren't relating to that, I think you're being dishonest with yourself. But that being said, because he's a hyperbolic case, of course, but being said, I think the thing that I find most, that I appreciate most about it is the idea that the need to accept the past, the failings of the past, to integrate where you're at with where you're going, with where you've been, and I do appreciate that. I culturally, having been 22 in, or 20. See, where was I? Anyway, I was roughly the same age Scott was when the first volume was published, and so that was one of those things where those cultural elements, the indie band scene, that stuff that resonated with me from my own experience. I mean, except by that time I was already married with a kid, so by the time Scott was even thinking about being serious, so that was a little different. But I the fact that that the things we are today are the way we deal with the things we saw yesterday. I think that's a theme that I really like, and I like the fact that it wasn't that he really knowingly and intentionally played with the idea of just who is the NPC, the idea that people's stories are going on around them, the other people's stories are going on around the main characters. I thought that was a fun way to do it, and I like the visual style of it. So I'm really glad to revisit it again, and definitely something I want to take another look at later on too. Although we definitely will not be doing 6 more shows on it in a row.
No.
This was an interesting experiment, but we gotta. I'm glad it's over.
Yeah, well, even like this experiment, we were talking about this beforehand. If we were willing to dedicate 2 hours plus whatever rollover change instead of just 1 hour, we probably would have just done this in 3 episodes instead of 6.
Yeah. I think so.
I don't know. I think it was important, especially for me, to be reading them one at a time.
Well, and I think it could have been really interesting to break it down the same way they were going to do the movie. It's a trilogy.
Yeah. Interesting point.
Maybe not right away, because it would definitely be better to just get into some other stuff. I really like Scott Pilgrim. I like talking about Scott Pilgrim. 6 weeks in a row, like that's even much. So I do plan on watching. You
guys out there in YouTube land who have hung with us through this whole process, thank you. Hopefully it's been enjoyable to listen to. Hopefully we haven't droned on too much about stuff. And I do appreciate that, because I know this is definitely not everybody's book. Clearly.
But it would be cool, because it's only going to be like, I think, a limited series, 1 season, if sometime next year, after we've filled up a bunch of the gap, to actually talk about the animated series that's coming out on the 17th.
Yeah, that's a possibility, I suppose. Okay, so the final Scott Pilgrim word for at least a long time, Hertunicus.
Okay, so if there's one thing I've learned through my many years of consuming media, particularly long-running media, and Scott Pilgrim isn't the longest, but it is a series. It happens over, 6 books. Um, whether it be comics, movies, TV shows, when you have asked your audience to invest in a story for a long period of time, the ending can be one of the most important details in the entire journey. There are a lot of great stories out there that have crummy endings, not just because, not necessarily because there was anything wrong with the ending, but because they didn't actually sum it up in a way that felt like it was the end. The good ones, and I'll point out examples like Toy Story 3, Mad About You, Avatar The Last Airbender.
I hated the end of Mad About You.
Really?
It's trash. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
For me, the good ones, they do more than just end the story. They make you look back on the journey that it has taken to get here, right? And make you look back on it with appreciation. It's almost like your baby has grown up, right? And if they do it right, you can be tearing up as you get to the end, not because like, oh no, it's over, I don't want it to be over, simply because, wow, what a journey. Scott Pilgrim was not supposed to make me tear up, but every book, something about it got a little better than the last one. And you may remember, I joked at one point, I did book 4. I said, this is where he got it together. And I said, at this rate, if the first book was quite possibly the worst comic I've ever read, then maybe the last one will be the best. Well, that's wishful thinking. But this book definitely was the best of the 5.
6.
And of the 6.
I think he's just trying to forget that 5 happened.
No. Here's the thing. I liked 5.
I know. Actually, I'm the one that was trying to forget
3,
it.
right? This series somehow got better. It got better in writing. It got better in art. It got better with its jokes, with the slog that used to be trying to read its dialogue. And it even got better in terms of sucking me into the story itself. What that means is this whole gosh darn story has just pulled off the greatest fourth wall break of all time. By not just telling a story, it demonstrates one. Was this the greatest book ever? No. Was it the greatest series or the greatest story ever? No. But ultimately, Scott Pilgrim is a story about redemption. It is the story of a just downright awful human being who inexplicably, over the course of several events, manages to overcome his downfalls and become a pretty good human being. And they do it through a truly awful comic that over the course of 6 books manages to overcome its downfalls and become a pretty good comic. And that is something I will never forget. It's easy to rant and rave about something you just absolutely love. It's hard to make me think both negative and positive things about something and let that be one of the most have the most effect on me in terms of looking it back. I'll probably never read this comic again, but I will never forget it. And I think that's the best thing I could possibly say about it.
I feel like there's been a character arc through your speech right there. But
Yeah, it sounded like a "what I did last summer" essay that you were assigned in school almost.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, and I don't expect people to read it. Actually, as much as I like these books, I don't think they're like God's gift to humanity or anything. I hardly ever expect anyone but me to read the books more than once.
That's hilarious. No, I really enjoy this book, and I like I said, a lot of the humor, the style, just resonates with me. Hey, listen out there! If you guys like Scott Pilgrim, you should read my comics. Hey, if you hated Scott Pilgrim, you should read my comics. Go over to ideacomics.net, check it out. Got some articles, links to our other stuff. Just do it. Come on, man. And while we're at it, there, of course. Twitless's book, the Adventures of Omega Girl. They're on Indie Planet. The Metal does his whole Extendless Chaos
So I
story.
specifically shared the first short for On Tour Mitch and Sandy because like if you did enjoy Scott Pilgrim at all, probably the thing that I do that is most like it is probably On Tour with Mitch and Sandy. So that's kind of like a relevant thing to drop.
Yeah, definitely. And you can always check out Force of Good and Evil. We have a whole bunch of pop culture infused superhero comedy that's there. And you can also check us out, Global Comics, for a whole bunch of different stuff there as well. But yeah, that's the quick shilling. Oh, hey, I almost forgot to mention Super School.
Yep.
And next week, come back for something new. So we got to wrap it up, man. We've been at this. I appreciate you guys all hanging out, but we gotta cut it short. So thank you very much. And in 2 weeks, it's like Thanksgiving. So it's Logan's favorite time of the year.
Yep.
So, yeah. So anyway, we're calling
Absolutely.
it. We'll catch you guys later. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter for the schedule as it develops. Later. Bye.